So I'm a free market guy, like really, really a free market guy. But I want to understand what other people are experiencing and how they are thinking about these things. And today we're going to talk to Sean Smith, who is a Canadian dairy farmer. We're going to talk to him about what is Canadian supply management.
What supply management is, in Canada, we only produce milk that is going to get consumed domestically. So we don't produce any extra milk that we're going to export. We limit the amount of milk that is produced so that we never have excess milk.
And the difference that it makes for small operations.
It has allowed us to stay at a very family farm size. We do get a bigger piece of the pie. So it's making a very fair deal for dairy and poultry farmers. In the modern world where there's free trade seems to be the way, most people are going. But at some point you just have to say, well, if this is making our farmers in our own country more profitable, does it really matter if other countries don't like it?
Dairy in America is gigantic. And I think part of what makes the difference for Canadian dairy farmers is supply management. So it'll be interesting to learn from Sean about these things today on episode 436 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Ranch Right and the South Dakota Grass Sawing Coalition.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. Very excited to be joined today by Sean Smith. Sean is a dairy farmer in Manitoba, Canada, and we're going to talk to him today about how Canadian supply management affects his business. What is Canadian supply management? And then also about how the tariffs are affecting him as a dairy producer in Canada. How are American tariffs affecting him as a dairy producer in Canada? We're also going to talk to him about how the Canadian supply management systems open up some options for him as a dairy producer that wouldn't be open to him maybe if the only option he had for being profitable was to continue to scale larger and larger. So looking forward to sharing this conversation with Sean with you right after a word from our sponsor today, Ranch Right. We've all been there. You've watched the YouTube videos, you've read all the books you can find, and you've listened to some compelling episodes of various podcasts. You're in. Grazing is going to save the ranch. And while that might be true, there tends to always be a bigger problem. A bad gross margin, even with increased turnover, is still a bad gross margin. And with a bad gross margin, if you increase turnover, all you're going to do is go broke faster. Don't be a grazing zealot. Focus on profitability. After all, it's possible to outbusiness a bad grazing plan, but you will always struggle to outgraze a bad business plan. Bad business is just bad business, plain and simple. Don't get stuck there. Ranch Right has a team of financial experts who help you focus on profitability and ranching right. Use their actionable financials so you can create generational wealth and become a profitability zealot rather than a grazing zealot. If you are ready to see the power of good business and profitability, head over to ranchrightllc.com to book your free consultation now. Ranch Right. Sean, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Obviously, as of this recording, lots of discussion. We're actually recording on St. Patrick's Day, so happy St. Patrick's Day. Lots of discussion about tariffs and especially between Canada and the U.S. and the USMCA and all these things that go into that. So kind of give us a little bit of your context and what you are doing there and where you're at and how this affects you.
Yeah, so I'm a dairy farmer from Manitoba. We farm 560 acres and milk 60 purebred jerseys, so we're a fairly small farm. And we're a third generation dairy and a century farm, so been doing this a while. And yeah, as far as these tariffs and the discussion around tariffs right now, we haven't, honestly, I haven't felt too much yet. I think for us, for the most part, it's actually just going to be like buying things. I just ordered some new parts for our disc drill, and I feel like that might be the first time I get to really feel the effects of the current back and forth tariffs. But yeah, as you said, there's lots of discussion right now. And so I figured I would just offer myself up to maybe give a Canadian perspective and a dairy farmer specific because of our unique supply management system that we have here in Canada.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So kind of talk to me about what has been the norm. How has it worked up to this most recent conflict, I guess?
So supply management has been in for, I don't know the exact date, but it's got to be over 40 years now. Um, and so what supply management is in Canada, we only produce milk that is going to get consumed domestically. So we don't produce any extra milk that we're going to export. And, we limit the amount of milk that is produced so that we never have excess milk. And what this does is it ensures a steady price for us as dairy farmers because we're matching the supply with the demand. So therefore, we just aren't seeing those price fluctuations as demand. Whether if you're using exports, it can go up and down. And so that's a system that we've been using now for like I said, close to 40 years. And in the past, I'd say, trying to think when the first Pacific Free Trade Agreement was. That was about 10 or 11 years ago. Was the first free trade agreement where Canada has given up a little bit of our market access.
So you basically said that this is kind of the first time in about 40 years that this has been kind of a meaningful impact. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is the first time. I think there's 3 or 4 trade agreements now that Canada has given up some of their market access. So before they were pretty, steadfast that they were not going to give up any market access, tariff free, that is, I should say. But as, world economies have kind of kept moving to more of a free trade style, and Europe had similar systems, but they got rid of all of them. So we were kind of like the last country that had a system like this, and other countries do not like it when they're negotiating free trade agreements. And so yeah, I think it's up. We're at 18% now. That is tariff free access to our dairy market, with various different countries holding different percentages.
Sure. Do you have a feeling of what's better for the producer?
Yeah. So as far as for us, we really like the supply management system because our milk price is like I said, it's much more steady. We don't have the same ups and downs. And maybe I should go into how they pick the milk price because since we're all selling our milk to a milk pool, we don't have like individual co-ops that are coming and buying our milk or anything like that. We all sell it into our provincial milk pool. And so that the price we get is set by the Canadian Dairy Commission, which is a third party that every year does surveys of roughly 10% of dairy farmers in Canada. And then they will do a cost of production survey with you. So they'll like come in and basically go through your whole books for the whole year. And they do a cost of production. And then they set that milk price for the following year based on the average cost of production. And so basically, if you are a farm that has lower than average cost of production, you're going to be more profitable. If you're a farm with higher than average cost of production, you're going to be less profitable. But it's a third party that goes and does the average. And then basically processors, they are regulated to buy milk at that certain price. They can't try to undercut and go underneath that price. It's all regulated that they have to buy at that certain price. And it even goes so far as once you get to selling the milk in the grocery store, there are caps on how much you can charge, like a processor and a retailer can charge in the grocery store. And that's for consumer protection. So actually, Walmart just got caught selling 2% milk for higher than they legally were allowed to. So it does get regulated, and that's just for consumer protection. And processors don't like this system because their cut of the pie isn't as big as it is in other places. They're still very profitable. Like Saputo is one of the biggest processing companies in the world, and it started in Canada. But dairy farmers get a very large chunk of the pie compared to most other agriculture industries, where we know that farmers are getting a small chunk and everyone else down the line is getting a big chunk type thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think there's a lot of people that can identify with that. I think that, and has this system been working for a long time? Because I think my perspective, I would expect price controls to be a difficult thing for the market to, figure out.
Yeah, no, it's been working. I guess, lots of people make the argument that if we had an open market without price controls, that consumers would be paying less for their product in the store. But usually when they factor in government subsidies, which in Canada we get zero government subsidies, dairy farmers, and same with this covers poultry products as well. But when you factor in government subsidies, usually it's about the exact same price you're paying as a consumer. It's just paying it in through your taxes or at the grocery store, which when you have it in the supply management system, when you're paying it at the grocery store, a bigger chunk of that money is going to the farmers.
Yeah. Yep. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate that it's working well, especially for you. And some of those things, it's just a challenge to my own paradigm. So, always willing to entertain those as they come up. So, what do you think kind of this means for the boots on the ground dairy farmer, especially like yourself? Talk to me a little bit about like what you're doing there, how maybe how your operation is set apart from others, and kind of the opportunity that makes for you.
Well, yeah, the biggest thing would just be that it has allowed us to stay at a very family farm size. We do have one full-time employee, but otherwise it's my dad and I. And we're able to stay at this size and operate. And we haven't, there still is you still feel some pressures to expand because, there's still are factors that are making margins tight. So you want to, there still is that bit of a pressure to expand, and certainly the average size of Canadian farms is going up in for how many head. But for the most part, our average size is much, much lower than the United States. And we don't have as many 5,000 plus dairy farms. There's maybe some that are, 2,000 plus, but there's those are pretty rare as well. And so it's made it so that we can stay at a family farm size, and which gives us, I think for us, we have the farming mindset of that we want to look after the land, and we want to do lots of regenerative practices and stuff like that. And having a stable milk price and a fair milk price makes it a lot easier to try to do some of these things and maybe take some risks or Yeah, I mean, I guess we can get into that a little bit later in terms of like why I think like this matches with Regen Ag and has opportunities there. But yeah, it's definitely made it so that we've been able to stay a size that, my dad and I can operate this farm with a little bit of help in it, and it's very nice that way.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'd love to get into that in a minute. But a couple other things on this front. Um, is there limited upside then for some of the more niche market strategies like grass finished milk or grass fed milk or any of those kinds of things? Does that do some of those caps on what the retailers can charge limit your ability to do some of those things?
Those things would be called a specialty milk, and so they have separate type of regulations. And so I think if you're above 4% butter fat in your milk, you're considered a specialty milk, and then organic and A2 milk and grass fed would all be considered specialty milks too. And so I think once you get into that specialty milk range, you actually have more leeway to set your own price at the retail if you were the processor or processing your own milk. So it doesn't really affect that. Like there's those markets are mainly in Ontario and BC where there's higher density of dairy farms, and therefore like it's easier for the processors to find enough milk um to like run that market. We ourselves have looked into some of those things, but we're kind of away from the main dairy area of even Manitoba. So just truck getting our milk to a processor is limiting factor, but I think that'd be a limiting factor, regardless of supply management or not, just because of where we're located.
Right. Yeah. When you talk about the size of the dairies there, yeah, I toured a 900 cow dairy a while back, and there at this point in American agriculture, a 900 cow dairy is considered a small dairy.
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. I haven't been to any huge ones, but I've been to a couple that are over 1,000 cows, and I couldn't imagine going to some of those ones like in Texas that are 10,000 cows or more, 20,000 like that. That just is mind boggling to me.
Yep. Yeah. And so how are these tariffs then? Are they going to have an impact there? Are the tariffs trying to do away with the supply management system? Is that what is happening then?
So as far as tariffs on dairy, before Canada gave up any of its market access, everything that came into Canada was tariffed at like 200%. And so mainly it was like only like really specialty cheeses from Europe that were like the only thing that people would pay that much for. But like I said, we've been giving up um, percentage of our market access in these trade agreements. And so at the last Kuzma or whatever you want to call it, the last free trade agreement between Canada and the US got 3.9% of our market access tariff free. And so as of right now, the US actually hasn't filled that 3.9 yet. So any milk that's coming into Canada at the moment is tariff free. So it's not affecting these tariffs, like any counter tariffs that Canada has put on. Like I don't think they put on actually counter tariffs on the free market access. So if you're hearing that Canada's like tariffing at 200%, that's only above what was already negotiated in that
Only
free
above the
trade.
3.9% that the
Yeah,
USMCA had negotiated.
exactly. So US actually isn't getting any tariffs because they're not filling that 3.9 at the moment. And then Canada sends a little bit of milk to the US now. That was part of the deal. And so it's only like 1% of our annual production. And so even if that gets tariffed, it's probably not going to be felt that hard, to be honest, I don't think.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And like you said, the US hasn't even filled the 3.9% that they could do. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, yeah. So let's transition and talk about kind of the regen ag side of this and what that what opportunities that opens up for you. And, my own ignorance would tell me that regenerative dairying is one of the harder nuts to crack. So help me understand how you are going about that.
Yeah, it definitely has its unique challenges for the context. Probably the biggest one is that we calve year round. So when you're thinking about mimicking nature, like no one calves year round. Nothing calves year round. So um, that's probably one of our biggest ones because then we're always having cattle in different stages of um, dietary needs all throughout the year. And so it makes it hard when you're trying to like push cattle to like say like eat stockpiled grass. Um, but she is a heifer that either needs to get pregnant or is about to calve, then that's probably not going to be like enough nutrition for them. Um, and like our dry cows, for us, they go outside in the wintertime, and we kind of have realized that we have to baby them a bit more. They're not going to go bale graze because they'll just lose too much weight trying to go out and stay warm. So we make them a TMR still. We still make them eat out on pasture as much as possible, but we try to make sure it's a formulated TMR. So there's those challenges. And then like the other challenge is that you have to milk those cows at least twice a day. So you can't, you can't have them out in a pasture and they can't come back to a barn. They always have to come back to a barn. And so on our farm, we have a robotic milker. And so our cows have access to pasture 24/7 in the summertime, but they have to go through the robot first before they go out and access that pasture. And so that's one thing that, we've been able to make work, but we still aren't getting 100% of their diet from pasture. It's usually between 40 and 60% of their diets from pasture. And we still have to feed a little bit in the barn so that they're in there to go through the robot twice a day.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, South Dakota Grassland Coalition. If you're in the business of managing livestock, you've probably experienced drought, shortage of time, not enough help, and hefty debt. But facing one or even all of these challenges doesn't have to leave you worrying about how you'll make it through another year. Learn how to increase stocking rates, extend your grazing season, increase plant diversity, retain moisture in your soil, spend less time and money on weed control, and much more at one of South Dakota Grassland Coalition's grazing schools. During this intensive 3-day program, area producers, along with presenters from state and local agencies, combined hands-on activities in the field with classroom-style presentations to walk you through the steps necessary to create a grazing plan that suits your unique operation. Reserve your spot at one of the 3 grazing schools today at sdgrass.org. How are you making the TMR? How are you putting up those crops and some of those things?
Pretty much all of our crops are multi-species mixes, whether that's perennials, about 50% perennials, 50% annuals. So our perennials are usually a pretty diverse mix of legumes with a little bit of grass, and then usually like plantain or some kind of bulb like that. And then our annuals are usually like a cereal like oats or barley mixed with peas, turnips, kale, ryegrass, clovers, and we pretty much do all silage. We do a little bit of dry hay, but mainly all silage, whether it's silage bales or chopped silage pile.
Sure. And then are you taking multiple cuttings off of that, kind of chopping it at its peak protein content?
Yeah. With our perennials, we'll do 2 or 3 cuts a year. With our annuals, we'll do it depends on what we're growing the annuals for, whether it's for high digestibility or we're letting it go for starch. But if it's high digestibility, we are cutting it fairly early, and we can usually get a second cut off it. If it's for starch and we want the grain to fill a little bit, we'll cut it later and then just graze the regrowth. of those plants.
Sure. And what do you think is the key to making that system regenerative? What do you think are some of the things that help that actually continue to improve soil?
I mean, I guess just trying to follow those 6 soil health principles. You know, we do pretty much all zero till with a disc drill. We might do some experimental tillage, though, this coming spring, just because we're a little bit worried about how we're going to do weed control in the future if we keep using the same chemicals as for weed control. So we might do a little bit of experimental tillage, but yeah, we try to do zero till, as much diversity as we can that makes sense. We try to get pretty much every acre grazed at least every second year.
Hmm.
And then in the summertime, we do some pretty intensive rotational grazing or amp grazing with both our milk cows and our young stock.
Yeah. So how are you deciding where they're going to go for their grazing on a given day? Are they on some of the fields that are planted to, these mixes and some of that?
Yep. Our milk cows, they have about, I don't know, 14 paddocks that are right close to the barn on the home quarter. And so they're all between 5 and 10 acres. And so most of those are in perennials, and then we'll have 2 or 3 planted in annuals. And so usually at the beginning of the year, we're mainly just grazing perennials, trying to graze it in a vegetative state, move over it really quickly. And then by kind of mid-July, we will have gone over our perennials twice. And usually that's when we start getting drier weather. And so the perennials start slowing down and need a bit longer of a rest period. And that's when we start moving into our annuals and put them into the rotation as well. And we'll graze those annuals 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. That's a great system.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say we love it. I mean, it's too bad that we live so far north and it only lasts for 4.5 to 5 months because it's the funnest time of year. So
Yeah. But you're milking year round, right? You said you're calving year round, you're milking year round, and you're feeding TMR up to 60% during the summer. Is that right?
yeah, like usually when our pastures are in really good shape, depending on just rain and stuff, we can usually get 60% of the cow's dry matter intake from pasture. So then it'd be 40% TMR. But it can also go the opposite way. If it's really dry and we don't have very good pastures, they might only get 20% from pastures and 80% from TMR.
Yep. And then during the winter, the TMR is 100% of the diet, and that's 8 months out of the year essentially for you.
Yeah, pretty much. 7.5, 7 to 8 months, depending on how late our fall goes.
And what percentage of that are they eating in the barn?
Pretty much all of it. We have done a little bit of in the fall feeding TMR out in the field and letting the cows go out at night and just eat out of bale feeders that we just put TMR on the ground and put bale feeders around them. It works really good. It's a great way to put manure on your pastures. It's awesome. But the only problem is they like it too much and they go outside and they stay out the whole night. And then you have to go bring them in the morning. And then since we have a robotic milker, we can only milk 1 cow at a time. And so then all of a sudden there's 30 cows that all need to get milked right now. And it kind of screws that up a little bit.
Sure. Yep. And one cow is getting milked at a time, and they're all getting milked twice a day. Is that right?
Yeah, roughly. In the winter, it's closer to 3 times. But
they're getting milked 3 times a day in the winter?
Yeah.
I see. And that's because you're more consistent on the nutrition side? Are they're producing more in the winter on a TMR?
Yeah, they usually are producing a little bit more, but it's mainly just that they're locked in the barn. So they get a little bit of grain when they go through the robot. So they're just close by. Whereas in the summer, same thing as they just like it too much outside. And so, so they go outside and they spend like 6 hours or more outside. And then it usually they just end up only getting milk twice a day. But we run a few more cows in the summer to make up for that. So we're not too worried about it.
And are those custom? Like, I don't even know. Do they do custom grazing in dairies? Are those custom cows, or how do you fluctuate that size?
No, we just kind of plan. We raise all our heifers, all our own replacements. And so I just kind of, it's all pretty much all artificial insemination too. So I just plan to calve out some extra animals in June and just have an extra like 4 or 5. I say extra, but it's not,
I see.
we're a small herd, so it's not really that many more.
Sure. And then, let's talk a little bit about genetics. And I think that probably is a pretty important part of making this work too. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. I know some people who have tried to take Holsteins that are like very North American style genetics and put them in a grazing system, and it's definitely not always a great fit for that.
Yeah. And so, what are you running for critters, and kind of will any of that breed do, or do you need specific ones? Do you feel like?
When we're selecting bulls, I usually select for kind of a balance of conformation and milk production. I grew up doing 4-H and got into showing cows and when I was younger, so that's kind of always been something that I've really enjoyed. And while it's more of a hobby. I still like a good looking cow, a really functional cow, because basically most of the traits of conformation are still based around trying to create a cow that's going to be have longevity. And so I do like conformation, but then obviously, I've got to pay the bills, so they got to be able to milk at the same time. And then as far as like grazing genetics, we don't breed specifically for grazing genetics too much. Probably the main reason is because, like I said, our grazing season is only 4 to 5 months. So actually, the majority of the time, we're not in a grazing system. So I kind of just at least hope that by getting as many daughters as I can off of older cows, that and we've been doing this for long enough that our own herd's epigenetics are starting to push through and make our herd more adapted to grazing.
Yeah. What do you think is the what's the average length of time a cow will be in the herd?
For us, I don't know, it's a little skewed because I actually sell a lot of cows for like mainly for hand milking and to put calves on. So, I mean, we do have quite a few old cows, but then there's also cows that get sold at a younger age simply because we have too many and we have a demand we can't keep up with for hand milkers. It's absolutely crazy how that market had like ever since COVID. It's just you can't sell enough. It's bizarre. So yeah, it's a little skewed in terms of ours, but we definitely have we really believe in cow families, and like selecting families that work in our herd. And so that's probably more how I make sure I keep old cows is if this cow family has produced a bunch of good cows, I'm going to prioritize keeping them in the herd and they're going to be the ones that stay a bit longer.
Yeah. And these are all jerseys, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All jerseys.
And has it always been jerseys at your place?
Pretty much. Yeah. When my grandparents started, they actually didn't ship fluid milk. They just shipped cream. So they would milk the cows, separate the cream, and then someone would come pick up the cream pails. And so yeah, the jerseys, of course, are the high butterfat breed. So they work good for that. And yeah, we just never switched. I mean, they're a very efficient cow. They're the right size we want to work with. They're very low maintenance. They have, few health problems and foot health problems. They're just a really easy breed to work with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And maybe grandma and grandpa were skimming the cream and feeding the skim milk to some pigs or something, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just having a conversation about that the other night, and somebody, I think it was one of, oh man, Justin, the guy from North Carolina that does the permaculture vlog. But he said he was touring a farm and he was at a guy who's raising jerseys, and he says, "Yep, we skim the milk off, sell the cream, and feed the skim milk to the pigs because it makes them fat." And he said, "Skim milk makes people fat too, but they don't know that yet." made me laugh. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. So, um, so yeah, I like the strategy. That's great. Just paying attention to the cow families and finding the ones that work and continuing to just do more of that, right?
Yeah.
And has that been the consistent strategy? Has there been any shifts in that strategy from a genetics perspective over the years, or just kind of everybody's always been on the same page, just keep doing what's working?
Well, I'd say that when I was younger, when I first got into 4-H, um, like my dad, he showed cattle a little bit, but then I got quite a few siblings, so once we all came along, I think he just got too busy, so he wasn't too worried about it anymore. But then we got back into it, and we had a decent herd, but it wasn't by any means like a show type herd. So I was ending up at the bottom of the classes more than the top. So definitely when I was like in my teens, I was thinking we needed to really start using some show type genetics and stuff. And we dabbled with it a little bit. I think my dad just kind of would every once in a while be like, okay, we can use a few doses of that bull. Um, but yeah, I mean, reality hit once those cows calved in and didn't milk very much. They just kind of looked pretty. And so so yeah, and to be honest, like where we are located, even if I wanted to really focus on show genetics, it just wouldn't be possible to make a living doing that because there's just no shows. Like I have to go to Alberta to show cows or to Minnesota or Toronto. So I still I still enjoy doing it, and we usually go to one or two shows a year, but it's kind of just a little hobby.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, kind of bringing this all full circle, the supply management also, I think, presents an opportunity for people in Canada who want to do dairying at, with a regenerative mindset, because generally regenerative mindset is less dependent on inputs, more dependent on just letting the soil health process do its thing and continue to increase, efficiency and production over time, right?
I think there's tons of opportunity for sure. It's the education that is still like such a huge challenge. I mean, but I guess we can talk about the opportunity first and like how I see it as an opportunity. Like I was talking about before, with the dairy, your cows have to come back to a barn to get milked. I mean, there is some outdoor parlors out there. I'm not sure if they'd ever pass regulation in Canada, to be honest. So that might limit us there. But for the most part, your cows have to come back to a barn. And so cows can only walk so far twice a day. And so you can only have so many cows grazing because if you're trying to graze 1,000 cows, you would need a lot of acres of pasture. And you'd get to the point where they're walking, you know, miles, miles to get back and forth from the barn. Whereas in Canada, where we don't have large dairies, or mainly small dairies, I think there's lots of opportunity for farms to lower their costs, their feed costs, and everything like that because they're small enough that they can graze and they can, have the cows just close enough to the barn and go graze. So I think that's a big opportunity. And the other one, which I guess depending on which way you look at it, some may say it's a crutch, some may say it's an opportunity, But having a reliable and stable milk price can be very freeing in terms of trying new things,
Mm.
because so much like people, they don't want to take a risk because it could be a huge failure. And even like when you're thinking, you know, with if you were a beef producer who wanted to change his calving season, you have to decide, where are you going to take that? What year are you going to take that financial hit of not selling calves for a year, or are you going to sell your herd and switch them to a spring calving? You know what I mean? Like if you wanted to switch from a fall calving to a spring calving to match nature, you'd either have to leave those cows off for a whole year or 6 months and not have a calf crop, or you'd have to sell your herd that you worked hard to get and buy a new one that matches that. Whereas with supply management, we get a steady milk check every month. And so that gives you a lot of freedom to, I guess, try some different things, do some small scale experiments, and stuff like that, and know you're not going to lose the farm or lose your shirt in the deal.
Mm.
But I think a lot of people would make the argument that lots of people moved into regenerative agriculture out of financial necessity, and that if you're comfortable, you don't make those changes either, which is definitely true. And that's where the education comes in. But it's an uphill battle, changing, trying to educate people on some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that it's really hard to see the writing on the wall, right?
Yeah.
As some people have said, unless your back's against it. And so, yeah, I think that is true. We don't often change until the pain of changing is less than the pain of staying the same. So,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, that becomes difficult. Was there a regenerative shift, so to speak, in the mindset at your place, or have you always was Grandma and Grandpa kind of on this path too? Just was way before it was called that, or how would you think about that?
Yeah, my grandparents certainly had an appreciation for like nature and wildlife. That was, part of the reason why they liked farming, was because they got to, go see wildlife out on the farm and stuff like that. So they definitely prioritized keeping ecosystems around, whether that was trees and sloughs, like just that was a priority for them. And that definitely got passed down to my dad and then down to me. My dad always had a very low input mindset, and I think part of that was that he was running around with 4 kids and, to hockey and everything like that. So in the winter, he would just be like, "Well, why would I, feed the cows a bale in like a penned up yard in pens every day when I could just go put 8 bales out in the pasture and let them eat it for a week?" And, so he was doing this stuff before it was like something that, we thought was gonna improve our pastures. He was just doing it because he was like, "Well, it's way simpler that way. I'll use less bedding, don't have to bed as often." And he would actually back then, he would kind of feed in one spot all winter and then put it up into a pile and compost it and then spread it. Um, but then, yeah, I think it was around, 2010, my dad went to a holistic management, weekend thing, and that's kinda when we first started hearing the word regenerative agriculture, and started to, I guess, make decisions based on wanting to improve our soil and our farm.
Mm. And can you point to some specific changes that you did make then?
Well, my dad came home, and that summer we put up a lot more fences. We split up a lot, especially our heifers and dry cows. Like our dairy herd, we had some like employees from like New Zealand and Australia and the UK that had taught my dad like how to graze milking cows really good, and so we'd been moving them twice a day for a while at that point. But our heifers, it was more so, you know, let them have a pasture for a week to 10 days and then move them to the next pasture type thing. So he came home, we put up a lot of single strand high tensile wire, and then got to where we're moving them every second day. And I mean, we're still putting up new fences all the time. Still seems like every summer we're building one or two more to make things even smaller and be able to manage it even better. So that was probably like the most like immediate thing. And then we had already grown barley with Italian rye and clover the year before my dad went to this holistic management conference. But when he was there, he heard people talking about growing peas and turnips, and so that was kind of like when we started really experimenting with multi-species annuals too.
Yeah. Yep. And what would you say? Is there something that you can point to that's been facilitated the most change? Has the cover crops and the multi-species been that, or something else that has really kind of moved the needle from a soil health perspective?
Yeah, it probably is those multi-species. Like before we were doing them, we were never like a farm that was like using a crazy amount of fertilizer for input, because we did have manure and stuff like that. So we were trying to rotate what fields got manure and then not fertilizing them as much each year. Um, but once we got into these multi-species and our zero-till drill and stuff like that, that's kind of where we really saw our forage fields really kind of take off. And, we've got to the point where we don't have to use any fertilizer now, haven't for 7 years at this point. And so that was probably the biggest thing, and probably the thing that, I would probably encourage other dairy farmers to do is these multi-species crops.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about the experimental tillage. What scale is this experiment going to take place at?
It's undecided. Depends who you ask, me or my dad. Um, yeah, so the idea is that when we're growing these multi-species crops, we're limiting like kind of what herbicides we can use because we have so many different species in there. So we're kind of relying a lot on glyphosate and maybe one or two additives to it in for like spring preceding burn-offs, or fall if we're trying to get a really good kill of dandelions, we'll do it in the fall. And we're not a big fan of that. We prefer if we didn't have to do that. But at the same time, main reason why we stopped tillage was because we do have some dry periods here where we get really dry weather. And we want to make sure that our soil is, has maximum water holding capacity and always has something on the surface covering it. So yeah, we've always been trying to decide which is the worst of two evils, the tillage or the spraying. And yeah, we haven't tilled for probably like 7 years, and we kind of just decided, well, for one, I've heard a little bit more research about like how, if you till once and then reseed it to a really diverse mix and maybe add some compost extract as an inoculant, you can get a pretty uh, biologically active soil right away again, and it's not as big of a hit as maybe people thought it was. So that gave me a little confidence to try it, and we'll see. We'll probably only do like maybe 40 acres this year and just see. And we got a couple of pastures that are side by side that we're gonna see which one works better, the spraying or the tillage. So.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And the weeds are a non-negotiable, right? Like can't have that at all. Is there a reason for that, or?
We just noticed, especially with these multi-species annuals, if you don't have good weed control, you just don't get much yield and tonnage. Um, and yeah, so I mean, ideally, it'd be awesome to go the whole farm perennials and manage it in a way that you never even have to reseed them. I mean, and actually I'm trying to do experiments with that too. I'm trying to I have a couple of our dairy paddocks that I'm gonna see how long I can go and deferred grazing and stuff like that to try to rejuvenate these pastures. Maybe even just direct seed into them to see if that is an option in the future. Is just we have all perennials, but you just manage them in a way that it's you can do that. But yeah, right now it's it's hard to do these annuals without good weed control. They just don't do as good.
Yeah, because the weeds are sucking up all the moisture. They're out competing.
Yeah, and they just come up so quick. Like
Right.
it's like
Yep.
weeds have had however many years to adapt to every condition imaginable. Like a good example is 2 years ago we decided we were going to grow oats and peas together and combine it, and then uh, mill it and feed it to our cows was our big plan. And so we seeded it, and it just did not rain for like 6 weeks. We got no rain, but it didn't matter to the weeds. They did fine. Like they came up and like they were just out there like crazy. But our spraying options weren't very good for in crop spraying, so we kind of just had to leave it, and we ended up with a below average yield on the grain crop and lots of weed seeds in the grain crop and yeah, it was just a very you know very stark reminder that especially if you're trying to go no fertilizer, it's like it makes it difficult because if you don't have moisture, that biology is not going to be able to deliver the nutrients to your crop either. Whereas if you're putting fertilizer directly with the seed, it's right there, and that crop can jump up right away and beat those weeds.
Mm.
But if you're trying to do it without fertilizer, you need moisture for that biology to deliver the nutrients to the seed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Very good. Anything we missed here today? Anything else that you wanted to share on this kind of marriage of regenerative mindset and supply management and how it kind of helps?
I mean, you could talk about this for a long time. There's lots of different things you could talk about. I mean, what I'd say is that as farmers, we're always talking about that we need to get a bigger piece of the pie somehow. But at the same time, most farmers are not fans of any type of regulation or government having too much control or whatever. But like with supply management, we do get a bigger piece of the pie as farmers, and and it's actually regulated to the point where those processors, they can't, you know, they can't do things like fixed prices and stuff like that to try to manipulate the market either. So it's like it's making a very fair deal for Canadian dairy and poultry farmers. And, in the modern world where there's free trade is kind of seems to be the way, most people are going, or they have been at least for the last 30 years. It's something that sticks out as, that other countries don't like. But at some point, you just have to say, well, if this is making our farmers in our own country more profitable, does it really matter if other countries don't like it? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean I'm with a lot of the farmers on not liking regulations, government involvement. But at the same time, if my competitor or if somebody else down the supply chain is going to use the government to unfairly rig the system in their favor, then I look at government regulations in that scenario as a self-defense mechanism. Where I would be in favor of, hey, let's not allow somebody to unjustly take a bigger piece of the pie than they should be entitled to. And so I can definitely see it. And then, I mean, just biblically, let's examine the fruit of this system. And the fruit is, more smaller family dairies continuing to thrive. It's a system that sets us up to be able to make that regenerative shift easier when we're talking about dairies where you don't have to walk miles back to the to the milking parlor, you know, there's more opportunity to make a better, less fragile, more decentralized, more regenerative food system when we make this. And so maybe there isn't an incentive, and then somebody else can email me and say, "Hey, that's not how this works," and we'll, you know, you can educate me as well. But I don't know why decentralization has happened in American dairies. I don't think they're vertically integrated necessarily, like a lot of the rest of the American food system is. But certainly there is massive centralization in the American dairy system, and so where we have a system just across the border where are arguably a tougher climate and an environment to work in, where they're actually succeeding in keeping these smaller dairies around and having a system that could be more easily transitioned to a regenerative system, then I would find it hard to say, well, we can't even entertain that as an option, because I think there's a lot of good fruit that you have shared with us today.
Yeah. And another thing that kind of, it's not dairy, it's has to do with the eggs, but when you're talking about food security, it's like, would you rather have, you know, farms where there are these, whether it's dairy or chickens, like a massive flock of chickens that they have to cull because of a disease comes in? Or would you rather have a bunch of small farms that if they get a disease and they have to call them, it doesn't affect your whole market? Because right now, like what we're seeing in the US with egg prices, you know, would that be different if, rather than these huge farms where they're calling hundreds of thousands of birds at once, they were just calling, you know, 10,000 or whatever? Would it have the same effects on your food security and your supply chain, and your price for the consumers then too? Like a lot of it, like food security and food sovereignty, you know, I think supply management fits in with those two things too.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, Sean, very good. I appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you, Clay. I appreciate you having me on.
Very good stuff there. Really appreciate Sean and his perspective. He has a unique perspective from my own, and one that I am really thankful to have the opportunity to understand a little bit better. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, looking forward to sharing a conversation that I had with Taylor Moyer. Good to welcome him back to the podcast after a long time since I had him on the first time. And we're going to talk to him about how the difference that agritourism has made on his operation and his partnership with Land Trust to get the word out about the availability of his ranch to come, and some of the maybe out of the box ways that it has started to be used. So really excited to share this conversation with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.